There was once a school teacher who came to faith during a gospel mission. He trained for ordination and ran a seminary, and twice developed his studies in England. He was made provincial secretary of his denomination and later elected bishop. He moved to the north of the country and started to gain a following as a leader and preacher. But then the head of the army seized power and quickly began a reign of terror. Meanwhile, the former school teacher was elected archbishop. In a country where faith was everywhere, he was the only person who could command respect from the people and attention from abroad and stand up to the rampaging president. The year was 1974. The country was Uganda. The name of the president was Idi Amin, and the name of the archbishop was Yanali Luwum. Over the next 3 years, Luwum embarked on a multi-pronged strategy of holding Amin to account. Amin had expelled 55,000 Asians, murdered everyone from his predecessor's village, and shot many of his own soldiers. He killed perhaps 500,000 people. Luwum made regular visits to the notorious State Research Bureau to seek the release of prisoners, had briefings from his bishops, and maintained a civil relationship with Amin, exerting relational influence to pursue moderation. Luwum faced criticism from those who saw his actions as supportive of the president. By 1976, Luwum resolved it was time for a different approach. Through broadcasts, speeches, and sermons, he more explicitly referred to the pattern of arbitrary killings and unexplained disappearances. By February 1977, Amin had had enough. He arrested Luwum and, apparently with no sense of irony, set him before a crowd and asked, "What shall we do with him?" The crowd replied, "Kill him." Luwum was driven away in a Land Rover with 2 Christian cabinet ministers. Amin claimed they tried to seize the steering wheel, resulting in a fatal crash, but the many bullet holes found on their bodies suggested a different explanation. A year later, Amin attempted to annex part of Tanzania. Consequently, Tanzania invaded Uganda. Amin was deposed in 1979. Yanali Luwum is among the 10 20th century martyrs whose statues were unveiled on the west front of Westminster Abbey in 1998. His witness is synonymous with the expression "speaking truth to power." The origins of the phrase lie in ancient Greece, where the term parasia refers to courageous, unrestricted speech, the kind that got Socrates executed in 399 BC. Its roots also lie in Mahatma Gandhi's practice of the fourth force of truth, or satyagraha, which entails assertion without anger, insult, or retaliation. As Gandhi put it, asatya, meaning untruth, also means non-existent, and satya, or truth, also means that which is. If untruth does not so much as exist, its victory is out of the question. And truth, being that which is, can never be destroyed. Such ideas were incorporated in a Quaker pamphlet called "Speak Truth to Power," published in 1955 by the civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, although he initially wasn't given the credit for it because it was feared being gay made his ideas less likely to catch on. Those were the days. The pamphlet advocated the non-violent resolution of international conflicts. Speaking truth to power is an emotive phrase. In the hands of sophisticated organizers like Rustin and Gandhi, it indicates an orchestrated pattern of activity, combining rhetorical statements, symbolic actions, subversive non-cooperation, and collective protest. This assumes a context like 1960s America, where the rule of law prevails and the political authorities claim the moral high ground. So an appeal to democratic values will eventually prove persuasive. But Yanali Luwum had no such culture to rely on. For him, speaking truth was a different story, one that left him riddled with bullets. Today, the phrase has been popularized almost beyond recognition. It's now invoked by those who disagree with their boss or feel the urge to denounce an injustice on social media. It's become a validating slogan for anyone who wants to elevate their dispute and portray themselves as a warrior for justice. What was once a term denoting sophisticated organizers or courageous martyrs has been submerged in virtue signaling self-righteousness. So it's a good moment to turn to the 8th century BC and a figure who predates all the distinguished agitators I've so far mentioned. The prophet Amos offered diverse oracles to the people of the northern kingdom around 30 years before it was destroyed by the Assyrians, and his words were compiled by the people of Judah in Babylon 200 years later into the book that bears his name today. Those in Babylon were searching for answers as to why they'd ended up in exile, and Amos gave them an unequivocal thesis, because they'd let social inequality grow to shocking levels, allowing poverty to fester at a time of relative affluence. Amos is consequently remembered as the definitive abrasive prophet, telling people what they didn't want to hear, advocating justice and upholding the oppressed. I want now to examine his approach to see what we can learn amid both the nobility and the trivialization of speaking truth to power. Towards the end of his short book, Amos offers 4 visions. In the first, locusts devour all the grass of the land. In the second, a shower of fire burns up all before it. In the third, the Lord stands beside a wall with a plumb line in his hand. In the last, the Lord shows Amos a basket of summer fruit. The visions of locusts and fire foretell the destruction of the northern kingdom by invading armies. The plumb line indicates that Israel has been formed askew and, like a wall that's not built straight, can't simply be set right. The basket of fruit highlights the inequalities of the marketplace and the way the poor are defrauded and the severe consequences. What do these visions tell us? We see a prophet who's passionately committed to the well-being of his people and the survival of his nation. We behold a prophet whose principal conversation is with God. He isn't passing his own judgment, he's communicating a series of pictures he's received from heaven. We experience a prophet who portrays himself fundamentally as a witness. He speaks of what he sees, and what he sees largely speaks for itself, telling 1,000 words. We learn from a prophet who isn't locked into a personal tussle with an egregious leader. Nowhere in his book do we find Amos calling out an individual. The failures he describes are collective ones, and the cultural trends are ones in which the whole society has a part. And we realize Amos is a prophet who's immersed in his community. He's not an observer who comments and walks away. He's not above or beyond the things he's describing. This is a crisis in which he's a participant and will remain so. Having considered the cost of such witness, the history of the discourse, and the example of the prophet Amos, we may now be in a position to reflect on this emotive phrase, speaking truth to power. How do we know when to speak? How do we find the courage, given the cost, if not to our life, at least to our livelihood, privilege, reputation, comfort, and social circle? How do we know we're in the right and won't later have to apologize for hasty judgment or sweeping assumptions? How do we avoid the intoxication of exhilarating righteousness and self-importance? How do we ensure our intervention is not just words, but catalyzes the change for which we yearn? I want to dwell on the 3 key terms in this conversation: speaking, truth, and power. Let's start with power. This whole conversation is about realizing there's more than one kind of power. Idi Amin had violence, coercion, and fury, but Yanani Luwum had gesture, international scrutiny, the future, and faith. We tend to assume a scenario where we have the entire truth, while our antagonist has complete power. But things are almost always subtler than that. Witness and organizing are about uncovering hidden sources of power. They don't always work in the short term, hence Lewum's death. But Armin couldn't live on manipulation and deception for very long. As he was led to the Land Rover, Archbishop Lewum said to his fellow bishops, "Do not be afraid. I see God's hand in this." He was saying he trusted a power greater than Armin. Meanwhile, as soon as we realize we're not as powerless as we thought, we need immediately to reflect on how to use that power well. We can denounce in a second, but sometimes we turn out to be mistaken or not to have the whole story. In our eagerness to call out, we can cause further damage. I've done it myself. We all have power. Some of us have learned how, through collaboration, solidarity, rhetoric, or imagination, to maximize that power. All of us are capable of using it for good or ill. We may get a kick out of speaking for the powerless, but our energies may better be used in helping those who experience themselves as powerless find a voice to speak for themselves. There's also something subtle about where power truly lies. We most readily configure the conversation as one in which we, as a lone voice, though no doubt speaking for many who lack either the courage or the opportunity, speak to an individual whose exercise of executive power is well out of line. But sometimes power lies with an idea, an unspoken social assumption, a widespread unquestionable nostrum, and to speak a different word is to risk not so much physical danger from a regime, but social ostracism from a whole society. Sometimes a story so deeply aligns with the zeitgeist of the time that to cut across it instantly makes you a leper. It's the phenomenon I call apparently. When the world turns against someone, everyone is receptive to alleged stories that corroborate that person's heinous failures. And if anyone stands up to defend them, that person is regarded as tone-deaf or oblivious to the truth. Apparently, they did all sorts of terrible things. I can't recall what those things were or where I read about them. But if that lonely defender turns out to be right and the public mood changes, all the quickly adopted judgments melt away, and those who upheld them hide behind the veil of apparently, a veil that enables them to avoid any responsibility for having been so quick to condemn and free of any requirement to make amends. But what's happened is everyone's participated in the tsunami of social power that has no specific figurehead and for which no one is ever held to account, yet which crushes individuals and those who defend them as thoroughly as an oppressive dictator. That brings us to our second term, truth. The power of Amos's oracles is that he isn't centering his own judgment, convictions, or wisdom. He's saying, "This is what I see." In his case, that means this is what God has shown me. We can't all speak with the same confidence, and we can't assume our deepest source of authority is accepted by those we're trying to persuade. But there's a reason why the central moment of a trial comes when the barrister questions the key witness. Because giving account is what testimony is fundamentally about. Judgment is for others to make. Speaking the truth is essentially about witness. This is what I see. The power of Amos is in saying, I see those without influence crushed. I see those without money exploited. He doesn't have to point the finger, denounce, or call out. He just says what he sees. Sometimes when we claim to speak the truth, we're asserting that what we see has more validity than what others see. Witness is being content to say, this is what I see. I can't unsee it, and I think it matters. And trusting the power in letting that speak for itself. And don't forget, speaking truth to power isn't the prerogative of the righteous. When during the pandemic people concocted ideas that vaccines were harmful or unnecessary, they certainly saw themselves as speaking truth to power. The trouble was, it wasn't the truth. It was the power of disinformation, rumor, concern about profiteering by the pharmaceutical industry, or obsession with civil liberties. The number of people for whom such conspiracy theories are attractive simply indicates how complex is the notion of power and how contested is the concept of truth. There are conspiracy theorists occupying the highest echelons of power in at least one of the world's largest democracies today, even though the whole notion of a conspiracy theory assumes those at the top level of power are conniving to suppress it. So to become powerful today, it's become necessary to harness the tidal wave of public feeling that says the powerful are out to get us, and I'm the only one who can call it out and stop it. We all want to make a difference, but not all differences we make are good ones. In August 1975, with the Headingley Ashes test threadingly poised going into the final day, ground staff arrived to find the pitch dug up and oil spilled at one end and the words "Free George Davis" graffitied freely. So the match was abandoned and England's chance to reclaim the Ashes after their winter humiliation was lost. 3 friends of the convicted armed robber were imprisoned for the offence, but the Home Secretary eventually pardoned Davis. Unfortunately, he was shortly afterwards imprisoned for a robbery he did indeed commit. The 3 friends spoke truth to power, loyally, bravely, passionately, disruptively, but it turned out they were wrong. Not all courageous protests have right on their side. Here's the vital insight when juxtaposing truth and power: they're not opposites. They differ not inherently, but in timescale. Truth and power are the same thing, simply measured over different time spans. Truth names what will ultimately prevail. It's what will, in the end, prove powerful. Power is an attempt to shortcut the long, slow victory of truth by gaining a head start. Truth is invariably a tortoise. Power is the hare. The tortoise of truth will eventually emerge in the light of final vindication, but power will seem to hold sway for much of the meantime. Christianity is about so trusting the ultimate prevalence of truth that one is content to live for a significant time without power. It means trying to exercise a kind of power whose validity lies not in coercion, but in the embodiment of the future now. Hence, Jesus is the truth because he represents the presence today of God's ultimate, overwhelming future. So to the final term, speaking. Social transformation is a team game. Sometimes one body is best to research, another to organize, a third to publicize, and in that context of collaboration, one person to speak. We've noticed Amos isn't a pundit offering commentary from the sidelines. He's a participant. That means his words aren't just words. He has a stake in the outcome. There's no question words can have power and can convey truth. The question is, are words the best or only way to exercise power in the interests of truth? Long ago, I visited an older friend. She started talking about her father. He was one of the old school, she said. Manners, he used to shout. I will have manners. And he used to bang the table. Manners are out of fashion, she added reflectively. People want things you can have straight away. I asked, how do you bring up a child to be grateful, generous, and thoughtful? Is there any way of teaching manners without banging the table? My companion purred for a while. There is another way, she said. You're not going to like it because it's not easy. She leant forward and whispered in my ear, example. She sat back. Told you wouldn't like it, she said. Actions speak louder than words. In the end, speaking truth is only partly persuasive, regardless of whether you have any power. It becomes compelling when grounded in example. We worship Jesus not because he said, I will be with you always, but because he was with us through opposition, through passion, through crucifixion, through death. To say you are wrong is one thing. To say I see two things, the way you're doing things and the way this community is doing things. I can see their very different respective outcomes. It's not hard to judge which is the better way. That's quite another. We live in a profoundly anti-institutional age, and we live at a time when to position oneself as having been oppressed is to claim a kind of power it's hard for anyone to question or scrutinize without being called an oppressor. Which means many are content to criticize, denounce, or demonize without feeling any need to suggest, offer, or model what good might look like. Such a culture infantilizes us all by kicking over every sand castle as soon as it has the temerity to reach the height of 3 buckets of sand. To speak truth to power is to recognize, claim, and take responsibility for the power one has in doing so. To credit and contribute to the culture that's nurtured in you the habits and assumptions you've come to take for granted, and to hold up as an example a better way to relate and a profound way to evaluate truth. There's a time for an individual to step forward and take a courageous stand and face the consequences. But for every person called to be a prophet, many more are called to be part of a prophetic community, striving to embody practices that model a better way. Sometimes the most pernicious words that need to be challenged are, "There is no alternative." Such words corrode the imagination and make people retreat into powerlessness. The best way to counter them is not just to describe an alternative, but to embody one. Some are called to speak truth to power, but all are called to live a real alternative. Living a real alternative means modeling by the way we relate to one another kinds of social connections wider society can hardly imagine. It's what we call living God's future now. It's about allowing the Holy Spirit to portray today the way it will craft our lives together in eternity. That's not so much speaking truth to power, it's more living in the power of the truth. Thank you.
Sam, thank you. Sam is a great friend of the Festival of Preaching. We haven't had a Festival of Preaching which hasn't begun with Sam's, an address from Sam, and you can understand why. And Sam, you've always been very generous sharing the text of your talks, and I'm hoping that will apply today. So we should have checked that ahead of time, but I was confident we can email that to you. So while Bishop Marian is preparing to come up to join Sam, a reminder that please stand with your question. Please make it clear whether your question is for Sam or for Bishop Marian. I think they're going to have a few minutes conversation to begin this second part.
Straight to the audience, fine. I think we're going straight to the audience.
We're going to go straight to questions. I wonder who would like to begin. On the way in, said they had a question for Marianne. Who was that person? Maybe you would like to start. Or if I can remember it, maybe I could ask it. Was it yes? I think it was you. I think the question was, there is that march happening nearby today. The far right are feeling emboldened. They are making the most noise. How do we hear their stories, engage with them and speak with them? And I think that is to Bishop Marian.
Thank you for that question. Obviously, I have my own version of the context that you described. I don't know that it's possible to have meaningful conversations without relationships. And so I would start with relationships. And so it may not be possible to have a conversation with people that are marching in the streets that I don't know, or that don't see me as someone that would be a trustworthy conversation partner. So I would take a few steps back, which is part of the problem. We don't have the means easily to do that. There are also times when it's just hard to know. Many times it's just hard to know. But I think I would rest on the foundational premise that it's relationship and questions that lead us to greater understanding rather than setting us up to score points in an argument. So I would start there. What do you think? Yeah.
That was for you.
I know, but can I ask the question?
I think you've got to start with the tone of voice. I mean, I think that was most striking to me about the way you spoke this morning, Bishop Marian, was the tone of voice. You weren't trying to shout louder than the person that we were talking about. You were trying to model, you were modeling a disposition that says this is a better way to live, and this is a better way for us to interact with one another. And while your remarks in January were, had an edge to them, it was really the way you spoke. And you can't, even though you had, 6 or 9 months notice, you can't create that disposition overnight. I think the second thing I'd say, once the shouting has stopped, there then has to be an attempt to, and I think this is probably where we're most struggling, particularly in the States at the moment, to tell some kind of a truthful story. Because America is, as it seems from where I'm sitting, dominated at the moment by a story of entitlement and dispossession. That we had every right to this, and it's been taken away from us. And we don't always name explicitly the people who've taken it away from us, but we need to take it back. So we had a phrase, take back control, in this country a little while ago, and you've got making America great again. But they're both phrases that refer to something that we had in the past and were entitled to, and they have taken from us. And we find a sort of solidarity in reclaiming it. Well, I think both of those stories are nonsense. And, that's what needs to be called out, those stories. The trouble is, we have to recognize the church's complicity in those stories. I think the church in this country is still in a fantasy land that somehow in the 1950s we got it right. We need to say the 1950s were riven with racism and sexism. Homophobia, and you can make your own list, but let's start just with those three. I don't want to go back to the 1950s. That was not a golden era, and the Church of England needs to get over itself and enjoy the future that God is giving us now. So I think telling a truthful story is the beginning of any proper relationship. But it's got to be a story that's got a place for both of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that luxury that on both sides of the Atlantic at the moment is that there can be a story that's just for me, and you'll have to make your own arrangements. I think that's so significant. And again, we need to repent as a church who've basically said the church is for one kind of person, and actually, by the way, only that kind of person gets to live eternally with God too, is a church that is incapable of proclaiming a gospel that there's a place for everybody.
It's okay.
I have a mic here. One sec.
Thank you. Could I sharpen the question? A friend of mine was challenging masked men putting up flags last week in his own town. And when he asked the masked man, "Why are you doing this?" he replied, "I'm a follower of Jesus Christ." How do we speak about Jesus in public spaces when it's in contention with the populist right? It's a question for Sam, and I'd love to hear what Bishop Marian thinks as well.
I suspect this question for me because I suspect those flags had a cross on them, and I suspect it was a red cross on a white background. Well, how, to me, the question then is, with that really remarkable answer that you report, is how do we know we're following Jesus faithfully? I think we've got 3 little, pocket guides. One says, "When did you see me hungry? When did you see me thirsty?" I think you can all do the rest. The second says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," and follows in like measure, including "Blessed are the peacemakers." And the third says, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." So I would be tempted to say to the masked person very, very slowly, can you tell me, in what I'm seeing you doing, where I may see love, joy, peace, patience? Or just choose one of the 9 if you like. Oh, okay then. So, Bishop Michael Curry, who, as a friend of us both, made a point of saying, it's the church because it looks like Jesus. So there you go.
There are some arguments that cannot be won in the moment. And if someone says, in the context of the situation you described, that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and from your perspective that doesn't look like anything that Jesus would say or do, and one of the questions that immediately comes to my mind is, tell me about the Jesus that you're following, right? Tell me about this Jesus. And again, it wouldn't necessarily be a conversation on the street, but it might be a conversation in a different context. And to start there, there are a number of times in the Gospels where Jesus simply allows evil to be. He doesn't. Now is the time of darkness. Now there are just times when you're just overrun for a bit. Whole countries go crazy. We know this, and so how we live in those times, how we respond to those moments, is first of all imperfectly, because we're up against quite a bit. We're not immune, as Sam said so well. We're part of the problem. There may be ways that I embody look at me, look at all the vestments I was wearing just a few moments ago. Look at the trappings that go with the office of bishop. can you tell me about the Jesus I believe in by what I symbolize, right? So there's plenty to go around, right? But starting the conversation with, who is this Jesus? And as you said so eloquently in the latter part of your address, that actions are what speak far louder than words. And sometimes we have to allow that to be.
Yeah, from her, her. And then two for me, but for.
And then we'll have to give this chance aside as well, but go ahead. Yeah.
This is a question for either of you. If it's not too pointed, I would love to know how you protect yourselves personally when things you have said professionally are held against you publicly.
Things I've said personally, publicly, that come against you personally because, yeah, it's no fun being at the receiving end of all kinds of statements. It's good to, nor is it, by the way, it kind of cuts both ways. Adulation it's just the mirror side of that, right? So I would just say, I try very hard to live as close to the ground as possible. Now, I've been knocked off my feet, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's just really hard. But it's good to be surrounded by people who know and love you and who aren't either overly impressed by the people who think you're great and who see more of you than the people who would think the worst of you, right? It's also a good lesson to remember when I'm feeling similar feelings about other people, right? But there's that story in the gospel where Jesus, I think it's when he's in Luke, where he's read from the prophet Isaiah, and he sits down and says that now the scripture have been fulfilled in your hearing. And there's this sort of moment where they think, gosh, this is great. And then they want to throw him off a cliff, right? In the same, and I think, yeah, and he just sort of walks away. He just sort of turns and walks away. And I think, okay, so maybe sometimes you turn and walk away.
So I'm rather different from Bishop Marian. I actually rather enjoy being surrounded by people who adore me. I just haven't been able to find them. I do, but I would concur with Bishop Marian's opening comments just now, which is when you, I mean, this is sin really, but when you get yourself into a bad place, it is almost always because you're telling too small a story. And if the story is just about me and that thing I said and I wish I'd said it better, and actually I can't really stand behind every single sentence I said. I wish I hadn't said that third sentence and just said the rest. But then the BBC like that third sentence, and they just keep pushing that third sentence out, and they don't seem to care about my very well-crafted rest. They don't seem to be... then you're getting in too small a story where the whole world is hanging on my every words, and my every words are going to be absolutely decisive in this situation, and I blew it because of that third sentence. That is too small a story. And the point of having friends and family is that they remind you constantly there's a much bigger story out there, where if Newcastle don't get a result this afternoon, they're going to slip further behind in the title race. And then you sort of realize that actually the Newcastle are much more interesting than me. That's the only way. But I mean, but putting it theologically, what Jesus gives us is a bigger story. And it's not a story with ourselves as the main character. I think it's revenge from the other side now. It's really coming thick and fast.
Yeah, no, we have to get...
Sam, this is for you. I understand that what you've said is truth will out. It has its own arc to victory eventually. But have we got time with planet Earth and the way that different policies are being dismantled by the biggest democracy in the world, have we actually got time for truth to win when it comes to planet Earth?
Okay, I'm going to say two very unpopular things, since I think that's kind of what we're being paid the big bucks for today, to say the unpopular. Earth has got all the time in the world, ba-boom. That was a joke, by the way. It's just human beings that haven't. The threat to the planet isn't a threat to the planet, it's sort of threat to human existence on the planet. And that's a somewhat different thing. I mean, I watch David Attenborough like everybody else, and I would, I think it's absolutely horrendous what's happening to species diversification and so on, biodiversity. But the real issue is human disappearance from the planet, which is a reminder that our existence at all is by grace, and our identity is found in the fact that Jesus came among us as a human being, not in our perpetual continuance. Human existence on the earth will come to an end one day, whether by our own hand or by God's hand. So we need to get those things in proportion, and we also need to recall that our principal reason for cherishing the wondrous earth that God has given us as the theatre for the incarnation and the work of the Holy Spirit is so that we may show God how grateful we are for the gifts we've been given in this life, to have an even chance of being given abundant gifts in the next. And if we don't show that gratitude now, how can we expect to be given further gifts beyond? So I just want to say those kind of hard things theologically to sort of get our conversation right. Truth will out, because rather like the old Blue Peter presenter, if we make a mess of this earth, then God will be able to say, well, here's another one I prepared earlier. We cannot center ourselves so much in the story that we can so screw it up that it defeats the power of the Holy Spirit to redeem it. That's a fundamental mistake in our imaginations. That said, I hope I've already just said in the last 2 minutes plenty of reasons why we should commit ourselves wholeheartedly to the ecological movement as a fundamental aspect of our being with creation, which is the way we express our reconciliation with God. So I agree that the backtracking on the agreements from Rio and so on is a scandal and a shame and a scar on our consciences. But again, I think our best way to respond to that is to model what a community at peace with the planet looks like. Because frankly, if America and Russia and China and perhaps India are going to behave towards the planet as if it really didn't matter, what this country does is a gesture, but it can be a beautiful gesture that makes the rest of the world think, I'd like to live in the United Kingdom, because they seem to be at peace with themselves and with the planet. What an interesting manifesto that would be.
Okay.
So Mike, just behind you.
Bishop Marian, thank you very much for coming to Europe to establish meaningful relations. I think that's needed these years. I'm a pastor in the Danish National Church, and your inauguration speech did feed a lot of internal theological reflections among priests back home. Wondering what is our main purpose, to unite our nations or to polarize, or how do we avoid polarizing speaking truth? I would very much like to hear your views on it, because we had many.
So, could you repeat it again? I'm sorry.
Because what we were afraid of, we have many different views. When we speak truth to power, do we polarize more so that we don't listen? Or how can we speak truth to power without polarizing and make everybody feel that they belong in the same church, even they look politically very, very differently upon things?
Right. Thank you for that. number of ways to come at that. I'm still pondering the image of creating a wider story. I don't know when it became the norm that if a preacher or a bishop spoke, the assumption was that if you did not agree with her, you had to leave the church, right? The person who taught me the most about preaching said, "You've been given the opportunity to think profoundly and deeply about something that other people haven't had the time to think about. And so part of your task is to help them think about that thing. And if they think about it in response to you and they utterly disagree with you, but they've thought about it, then you have been fruitful in your task, right?" And it assumes, so I think part of it is to assume some way of speaking that does not communicate. And if you don't agree with me, you are obviously not welcome here. But if someone says to me, "I can't be here because of what you said on fill in the subject," that in effect silences all of the preachers. And we have a lot of churches who try to do this, by the way, and with all the best intentions. We leave, maybe you hear it here as well, we check politics at the door. We don't talk about politics here. And I understand that. I mean, they don't need to hear a rehashing of whatever news story I've been listening to. So that's one thought. And I would say the other is, if I know that some of the, and I think when I said to you earlier about like, to whom am I speaking? If I know that there are certain people in the congregation who are automatically going to fixate on that third sentence, even if I really liked that sentence, you know, and I know that a lot of you would like it too, but I know it's really going to set off, you know, use that image of Jesus and the sheep, if it's going to set off the one and they're going to leave because I said that one sentence, I have to ask myself, is that sentence worth it for the whole of the message? Or could I say it in such a way that I could actually be heard, right? Does that make sense? Like, so not to just stick it to people because I'm right, but to speak in such a way that I might actually be heard by people who are poised to see or hear the opposite. You know, it's an art, and I think that's why stories are so important, right? Because you can enter into a story and find yourself in it in a different way. So that's part of my strategy, if you will. And I also go out of my way to be in relationship with people who see the world differently. So, so people know that I'm being sincere about this. I'm not just saying it. And I you know, so there's a couple of things I would say.
Michael, but further the way back on this side, there's a hand that's gone up every single time. So we are coming to you.
Thank you for joining us today. My question is, what continues to sustain you, and what tools might we also have to sustain us, so that we might be tortoises who finish the race well, rather than hares who get burnt out and are no good to anyone when fighting the good fight?
Why don't you take that one?
The bishop has instructed me to respond to that question first. So I would say two things. Quite simply, it's got to be happening for you with God. It's got to be happening for you with other people. You've got to be learning and growing. Once you get into a mindset where you are a kind of provider of services, I don't mean that, you know, in a sense, services, worship services, as they were called in the States, more generally than that, a service provider, then I think that can really wear you down, and you're constantly aware of people's criticism and why do I bother, and no one says thank you, and all of that kind of thing. And for me personally, I guess this won't be a secret to some of you who know me a little bit. You know, I realized about 20 years ago that for me writing was not a hobby or a indulgence, not even in the Catholic sense. It was a spiritual practice. It was prayer. It was the way I met God. And so giving myself permission to write as a regular thing was a way that I was continuing to learn and grow in the way that for some people going on retreat to St. Bino's or something like that might be. And then secondly, and I'll a little bit of St. Martin's promotion here, you'll notice on the bookstore that 2 new Being With books have just been published in the last couple of weeks. So I have been involved with this movement for the last 5.5 years, but I did something over the summer which I hadn't done for a while, which was persuaded by a colleague. I said, I'm going to lead one of those groups again. I haven't done for 2 or 3 years, but actually it's got to be happening for me. I can't just be producing materials. I can't just be promoting it and speaking about it in different places. It's got to be happening for me. So we started a Being With the End of Life group at St. Martin's a couple of weeks ago, and we've been sharing our experiences of bereavement and preparing for our own death. And I'm really pleased I'm doing that because it's happening for me again. So those would be the 2 fundamental things. It's got to be happening for you with God, and it's got to be happening for you with receiving ministry, not just dispensing it.
I would just simply add, whatever gives you joy, do that. For deep joy, because that's a well that replenishes. I also feel that if I am too wedded to outcomes, I can get discouraged very easily. And I do get discouraged. And so one of the ways I'm reminded of my place in the scheme of things is when I remember that I have far less control over outcomes than I would like. Which doesn't absolve me of responsibility, but it does put my efforts in perspective. And then I can go longer than if I am, and of course, having something work out great is a big boost, but if that becomes the reward, it can be a deterrent when it doesn't happen. But thank you for the question. It's an important one.
So halfway back, we have time really just for, is yours very quick? Okay, that last question at the front afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. This question is first to Marianne, but also to Sam. Something I have heard increasingly in Christian circles is the idea that empathy is a sin. And this often comes packaged with the idea that soft Christianity, feminized Christianity, weak Christianity, this all-inclusive, all-loving Christianity is not the way forward, and we need to be more muscular, more like Jesus in the temple. What do you say to that?
The day before yesterday, I purchased 3 books with some version of toxic empathy, empathy is a sin, the something of empathy, because I really would like to understand better the argument, right? I mean, I feel like I have to understand what people are talking about. I can point to lots of examples where Jesus is kind of as David Brooks says, he's a badass, right? He's really hard, he's really clear, he's not messing around. He tells people they have to hate their mother and father. I mean, he really does. And so, but I want to understand before I just knock it down with all the passages that Sam quoted earlier, which I live my life by, or try to. So I'm tempted, and actually people are wanting me to respond, but I've got to give myself a bit of time to understand what the argument is, what they're lifting up, because obviously the consequence of what they're saying can be so terribly destructive, but before I weigh in, so more to come. But it feels like, have you ever had people tell you they don't believe in God, and you say, okay, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in, and they tell you about that God, and you say, well, I don't believe in that God either, right? So what are they talking about that they're calling a sin? And let's see if we believe that that's what, let's figure out what they're talking about and then have a good exchange. So I'll leave up. I'm sure you've already thought about this, so you probably...
Am I on? Don't you love Bishop Marian, that the way she engages the opponents of empathy is to spend lots of time trying to understand their position? Isn't that wonderful? I think I've only got one sentence to say, which is, in the incarnation, Jesus became as much like us as it was possible for God to become. I think only through becoming so much like us could God truly understand what it meant to be human. I think when I last looked in the dictionary, that's what empathy was.
So maybe I don't have to read all this, but...
I don't think those books.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I have to preach on the narrow path passage, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Shall I go?
It's yours.
So the question is the narrow path that leads to salvation, the wide path that leads to perdition. I think that is extremely pertinent and acute and uncomfortably truthful when it applies to oneself. It's completely illegitimate when one tries to apply it to other people. That's a line of scripture that has to speak to our heart and our gut, because I'm going to put myself in Bishop Marian's shoes now, but in June of last year, she realized, commissioned by the Dean of Washington National Cathedral and the chapter, no doubt, that she was going to have a tough gig in January. And there was no point asking somebody else to do it. Under the principle, strive to be what only you can be, she was to answer the Harry Emerson Fosdick hymn that she quoted in her sermon this morning. She was the person for that hour. There was a narrow path that led there. She could not get a speaking engagement in Vladivostok that would get her off that. No grandchild first birthday would justify her missing that. It was a narrow path. There was no pretending that she could find other and better and more important, pressing and personal things to do. She simply had to walk that narrow path to January 22nd or whenever it was. And she knew from that moment, and she probably knew from that moment, who would be sitting on the front row. That's what it is to walk a narrow path, and actually we all walk narrow paths like that. Yes, we want to tell our next generation, there's no limit to what you can do with your lives, and the Holy Spirit will fill you and resource you to do whatever you're called to do. And of course we say those things, but there are crucial moments in all of our lives when we look to one side and to the other, and we realize not only there's no one else is going to do this has to be done. I may be the only person that can do this. I must do this. That's the narrow path. The wide path is to say, surely, I mean, I'm very busy, terribly important. That's the wide path. The narrow path is to say, I can't not do this. Maybe this is actually why God was part of the circumstances of my conception. Perhaps that's why that car didn't hit me when I walked out in front of it. Perhaps it was for such a time as this, because of this narrow path that I walk today.
Well,
what do you think, Bishop Ben?
I was also thinking about the differences between superficiality and depth. That there are only some things that there's lots of things we can enjoy in the widest superficial way, but there are certain aspects of life that can only be known by going that, as you were saying, that going on that singular road. And there are some people who have the capacity to be deep and wide, but narrow and wide. But most of us need to choose. I can love, what's that great line that a husband said, his husband, this is a joke, so I'm going to tell you in advance so you'll laugh at the right time, but the husband said his wife left him to become a nun because she had fallen in love with humankind, but it was individual people she couldn't stand, do you know? And so I think there is something about, like, love is singular. You learn certain things the deeper you go with a few people that, well, anyway. But his was classic Sam. I would go with him.
Let's draw this session to a close, but I hope you have a sense, Bishop Marian and Sam, that we could listen to you all day. Please join me in thanking Bishop Marian. They have to leave us there's something else happening at St. Martin's this afternoon, but we were honoured to be here to hear you, as Mark said, and thank you again so much.